Hello and welcome. This is going to be a brief video user guide for the Hurst Spectrum FLD indicator on TradingView. We built this indicator as Hurst traders and analysts ourselves looking for a fast and focused projection tool to generate price targets based on the Hurst methodology. I'm going to go over what the indicator looks like, why it's built the way it is, and how to configure it per the settings. So this is what one instance of the indicator looks like when applied to a chart. And I'm going to start by drawing your attention to the most important part, which are the FLD lines, these red and blue lines here. FLDs are simply forward projected midpoints of prior candles. So for the currently selected 80-day nominal cycle, you can see the current session is projected forward 24 and 28 bars respectively. That approximates a half span of the 80-day cycle, and because this is a stock chart that's adjusted for weekends. Why do we use a half span? I'll answer that quickly by drawing a sine wave on the chart. Price is driven in part by cycles. In a perfect world, if it were driven only by cycles, or better yet, only by one cycle, then the price chart would just look like this. It would be a sine wave repeating ad infinitum. So if we duplicate that and shift it forward by a half span of itself, we would see that price always interacts with its half span exactly halfway between peak and trough on either side, and that the distance between trough and cross and peak and cross and trough is equal. So that's why we plot a half span, and then the resulting target boxes are simply the distance between, say in this case, prior peak to cross, extrapolated out same distance. This is incredibly useful even though price is not solely driven by cycles or a single cycle at that. So going back to the general look of the chart, we've covered the FLDs. The boxes here are price projections. Green ones in this case are prior or historical hit bullish projections. Red ones are hit bearish projections. This red one here, which takes up the entire screen to the right, is active, meaning it's current and neither hit nor invalidated. And then these gray ones here and here are invalidated or missed projections. Up here in the top right we have the info table, which at a glance tells you the cycle you have selected, the offsets being used, the time frame of your chart, the session type of your chart, and your signal type, which I'll explain in a moment. Then, because there's an active projection, you can see here the value of the top and bottom of box is labeled. If this projection were to be hit, that would get grayed out, indicating that it's already been hit. Moving on to the settings. The most important setting is obviously what cycle you want to look at. Unlike other Hurst indicators, we leave the cycle that you want to look at basically as customizable as possible. We do not limit you to time frame within reason. So what do I mean by that? Well, we're on a daily chart right now. Unfortunately, there's no meaningful way we can have you plot a 25-minute cycle on a daily chart. So if you switch the cycle to a 25-minute while on the daily, you'll get this not available for daily alert. And it will just go to a fallback 7/8 offset until you change it again. But 10-day through 8-year, (40-week), all of these can be plotted on the daily chart. And further, going back to the original 80-day, you can shift your time frame up or down and still maintain that 80-day offset, which will be automatically adjusted to the time frame. That brings us to the session type, which is the second most important setting. It defaults to auto. What auto means is that, like I just showed, you can change your time frame up and down, or even to a custom time frame like 17 minutes, and it will plot the FLDs accordingly based on the number of bars per day on that time frame. It will also, this is a stock, so these offsets are adjusted for the fact that it does not trade on weekends, but if we go to, say, Bitcoin, it will update accordingly to the new asset class, which does trade on weekends. But so what's the point of having this as a setting? Why do we have these other types? Well, the RTH, ETH, and 24/7 session types exist so that you can force a hard-coded set of offsets based on that session type if desired. Why might you want to do this? For example, let's say you want to look at the 3-hour cycle, and I'll go down to a 1-minute chart. If you're on auto mode, the 3-hour cycle, the half span will be projected based off of the calculated average bars per day. So if you're looking at a stock RTH chart, your 3-hour cycle, like any other intraday cycle, will be adjusted for the fact that the stock only trades for 6.5 hours a day and 5 days a week. But if you wanted it to simply be, look, a 3-hour cycle should be 3 hours of clock time, or rather a 90-minute exact half span, then you can force it to do so by setting it to the 24/7 session type. Similarly, if you use extended hours charts and you're on auto mode, the offsets in use will vary quite a bit depending on the liquidity of the asset. Not all assets trade all 16 hours a day of the extended hours session like Micron or SPY does. If we change to a less liquid asset, you'll see that we go down to just 16 bars per day on average, and the offsets change with it. You can also see on this one that 80-day was quite accurate. So if you wanted to standardize your extended hours offsets and not have them adjust based on the true hours per day traded of the asset, you would just change to ETH, and then they would all use the same thing. Those are the two most important settings, but to run through everything else, signal type. By default, a cross is counted when the half span, or the midpoint of the bar, has crossed the spectrum. That's this HL2. If you change it to close, then a cross is counted when the last or closing price of the bar crosses the line, the FLD or the spectrum. This does not affect how the FLDs themselves are plotted. It simply affects what is considered a cross of those lines. If you want to use manual offsets, which do not fit to one of the available nominal cycles, you can do so. So let's say that you thought the 80-day cycle was not really accurate and there was a more dominant 100-day cycle, for instance. Then you could come in here and say maybe you do a 45/50 offset. You just turn that manual offset on and it will adjust. Now, the manual offsets will not adjust up and down with your time frame. they will just read from here. So if you're going to switch time frame, you need to take that into consideration. Smooth FLD applies moving average smoothing to the FLDs. This is primarily useful if you're on lower time frames, small cycles, and the jaggedness of the FLDs leads to frequent spurious crosses, and you want to smooth it out and bring down the amount that price is zigzagging it. But otherwise, on high time frames, personally, I tend to leave that off. Target calculation mode, logarithmic or arithmetic, that is just the difference between target boxes being projected based off the percent distance between price extreme and intersection versus price distance between price extreme and intersection. So you can see if I switch that to arithmetic, that target box is going to go down a bit, as the price distance from here to here is greater than the percent distance from here to here. Show historical targets, toggle on or off. Enable ATR tolerance zone, that's simply if you say want to extend the target zone up or down based off of the ATR of the asset. You can change the display settings, toggle the signal line, which is just the midpoint, on and off. Toggle the FLDs on and off, target boxes on and off. Info table you can turn off, or within it you can turn off the display of the target value. And preliminary targets, which if we can find one, here. A preliminary target is when price has entered the spectrum but not exited it. It has to fully traverse the spectrum to generate a confirmed target. If it only enters it, you get a preliminary, which will be displayed in the info table with this P and displayed on the chart as this dotted line. That can be toggled on or off entirely if you don't want it, or you can toggle how much room it takes up when plotted on the chart. Finally, these settings here, which are actually on by default, I turned off for clarity on the demonstration. By default, FLDs and target boxes, each cycle gets its own color, and the boxes are synchronized to that color. The reason for this is what I use as my default chart, which is here I've just got 5. Really, I normally would have every cycle on there, and I flip them on and off as desired to see how they're interacting with each other. If you do that and the cycles are not color-coded, it becomes cluttered and hard to read quite quickly, whereas if you have them all color-coded and you have them all enabled at the same time, it's much easier to read, as you can see here. And the reason you would want to do that is you can look at different cycle interactions. What's happening with the 20 and the 80 day, the 40 day and the 20 week, 80 day and the 40 week, so on and so forth, which is important as all these cycles are interrelated to each other, which is something that we've covered with some educational bits on our Twitter page and on the website. So I think that covers everything I wanted to show about the indicator. If you have any questions, please get in touch with us at either our email, contact@fldtrader.com, or on our Twitter at FLDtrader.